Welcome to this wet felting tutorial, phone eyeglass case. You're going to need some wool. I like carded wool in different colors, whatever colors you want. We're going to use some pops of color and some base colors. Also need a resist. This is a 12 by 5 and some bubble wrap, 2 sheets to cover your project. I use a pool noodle, but you can use a dowel and some soapy water. I like to use a spray bottle. First thing we're going to do is we're going to protect our surface and then lay down our bubble wrap. We want the bubbles to be facing up so that it comes into contact with our wool. And then our resist, and I believe actually this is a 9 by 5 resist. Sorry about the bad numbers before. I'm going to lay down my first color of wool. If there's any bits, farm bits in your wool, just pick them out. We're going to do a 1 layer, and we're going to come down about maybe 2 inches or so, about 1.5 inches, just a little bit, and put our first layer down. Now, as you can see, when I lay down my wool, very little hangs off the edge because this is going to get wrapped around, and this is how we have a continuous pouch and we don't have to sew anything closed. So just continue laying down your wool. Try to get it as even as you can. We'll go over, any little empty spots so that we have more of a even layer of wool. You could also feel it with your hands. The important part is to make sure that you have a little bit of wool hanging off the side. You don't need a lot, just a little. For my particular design, I am doing a little change up. So the top of my project is going to be blue and the bottom part of my project will be this heathered gray. You're just filling your resist with wool, making sure that a little bit of wool hangs off the side, maybe 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch. You don't need a lot. And then make sure that your wool all over is pretty even. I didn't do a very good job with my blue, so I'm going to go back over it and fill in any spots that I missed. So with my gray, I'm really concentrating on getting more of an even layer. Before we wet this, we're going to feel our wool and just make sure that it's nice and even. It's a little easier to feel if you just kind of mat it down with your hands. Again, if you have any bits, any farm bits in your wool, just pick it out. So I know that my gray is pretty even, so I'm just going to go back over with the blue and fill in any bald spots and try to even that up as much as I can. Carded wool is a little bit thicker, I find, and easier and a little faster to wet felt with than a wool roving or a thinner, smaller micron fiber. Since this carded wool is thicker, I don't need as many layers. All right, so now I'm going to wet it down and try to get as even of a layer of soapy water. Now, it's advised to start with hot water. Um, the hot water helps to open up the fibers and the fibers to adhere together a little faster. Make sure that when you put the second bubble wrap down, the bubbles are touching your wool, both on the bottom and top. And then I just smooth from the middle out to the sides so that I get that water to the edges of those fibers. For this first layer, I know I did not give enough water, so I'm just going to peel it back and give it another little spray on both sides. And then again, just rub and flatten out those fibers. Just very gently. And then I take both of the bubble wrap and flip it over so that I can work the other side. I like to work my corners first. I just make sure that my edges are wet enough so that they can be, so that it'll be easier to fold the fibers over. And I like to work the corners, make sure that they're nice and flat and even. And then I bring the rest of those edges onto the resist. Now, anything that is non-porous, anything that's not going to stick or that's waterproof, you can use as a resist. You could even use cardboard paper and wrap it in tape. Something that's going to be pliable because we'll be removing this, and anything that's going to be waterproof. Once you have your edges down, then you can put your first layer on the other side. So you'll be doing the same exact thing that you did on the first side. Making sure part of the wool is hanging over the edge of the resist so that we can have a nice smooth seam. Well, it's actually a seamless case, and this is how you get that seamless happening. You use a resist. Again, try to get as even as you can. You could always go back over it and fill in any bald spots that you have. And then I get my other color. Now you are more than welcome to do whatever colors you'd like. If you want to do a continuous color and a solid, just one color, go right ahead. I just wanted to make it a little bit more interesting with a dual color. Now I'm just kind of separating it so that the wool is pretty even. If I didn't do that, I'd have lumps and bumps, and I'm really trying to get this as even as possible. As I'm feeling it, I do feel some areas that can be filled in so that it's a lot more even. Just get your layer down as evenly as possible. For these phone cases, I usually don't go past 1 or 2 layers. I'm sorry, 2 to 3 layers. I usually don't go past 3 layers. I find that anything more than 3 layers, it gets too thick, too bulky. We're going to do the same thing as we did on the other side. Spray it down with water as evenly as possible. If the action of the water kind of like makes the wool fly, just put it back in place. The soap that I use is a natural soap with some essential oils in them, and it's low suds. A lot of wet felting likes low suds. It just works a little bit better, at least I think. Do the same thing. We're going to put the bubble side down so it's touching the wool, flatten from the middle out to the sides. Again, I know that I didn't put enough water, so I'm going to add some more water. The felting process needs water and soap. As I said before, I use low suds soap, a natural. The soap of choice for a lot of felters is an olive oil soap. I like that also. I'm going to flip it once that's flattened and do the same thing as we did, paying attention to the corners. I always, like I said, I like to do the corners first and get those in place before I get the rest of the, just flatten it out. And let it hug the resist. Yeah, make sure that it's really up. If your wool is not on the resist, what's gonna happen is the parts that are not on the resist are going to felt together, and you'll not have a continuous edge. You'll have more of a buckle, thick cornered edge. That's not what we want. We want an open pouch. I'm going to put a light second layer of wool. And I'm doing the same process as I did on the first 2 sides. I am making sure that some of the wool goes over to the edge, but not too much. We don't want our edges to be too thick. We want it to be pretty consistent throughout the entire project. One of my first wet felting projects, I was so uneven all over the place. I had bubbles, and not so much bubbles, but like very thick pieces, and it just didn't feel very very nice. And again, if you have any farm bits, sheep bits in your wool, just pick them out. I don't always catch them, but that's fine. This is a natural, eco-friendly phone case, eyeglass case. So I kind of like nature to be in there. I'm just checking for evenness. Now I'm just going to fill in. Now I decided to do some artistic things. You are more than welcome to do this also, but I'm just going to just put a little design on each side of my phone case. I like colors that pop out of other colors, so I'm using this mustard on the blue and the gray, and I'm just kind of just randomly putting, little shapes and patterns. If you're going to embellish in any way, try to do it while your layer is still dry, because then those embellishments will merge into your fibers. Now I'm using this teal color, just a little tiny pop. And I'm just taking the design where it's leading me. This is not pre-planned or anything. You can put lines if you want to put stripes. Once you're satisfied with a little design, just spray it down just like you did from the beginning. If anything, kind of flies away, just put it back in place and then cover it with your bubble wrap just like you did the last 2 times and flatten from the center into the edges. Now there is enough water now because I had sprayed it in the beginning and gave it extra water, so now that second layer is soaking up that extra water that's in the wool already. So I'll just flip it over. Pay attention to those edges and the corners. And then I'll do the same thing that I did on the other side. I'm going to add one more thin layer and then put a little design. Again, we want to make sure that some of that wool is hanging off the edge of the resist. Little bits, get rid of those. Yep, just like what you did on the other side. Same thing. This tutorial is in real time. I'm not going to fast forward anything. I'll probably put some music on so that you can enjoy the felting process. I'll just add some. What I'm going to do is just add another little design. I guess what I'm trying to do is kind of sort of remembering what I did on the other side, or just letting it flow, basically. Just putting some bits here, there, and everywhere. And get the teal and just put a little artistic design, a little abstract design. I always think these little designs add a little pop to a simple case or felt project. So I often do little designs in my wet felting. Dry wool kind of sticks to anything dry. Do the same thing that you did on the other side. Wet it down. So this is the glue. This is what holds everything together. And then your bubble wrap. Your bubbles are touching your wool and smoothing from the center on out to the edges. Flip it so that we can pay attention to those edges. This is our last layer. So we're really going to kind of pay attention to the overall shape when pulling in these edges. And I like to kind of just give the edge, even though I like raw edges for the opening, we can put a flap in here, and I've done that on numerous occasions on other, but this is a simple beginner one where I just want a nice raw edge opening. And I just kind of fold in those flyaway fibers so that I have a thicker edge so that it's a little bit more durable. I'm just going to spray it down a little bit. And I'm going to put some little random dots of teal in my project. Now, because these are thicker and I did not lay them into dry wool, it's going to take a little bit more effort to get these fibers to adhere to the wet fiber. So just give yourself patience if you're putting anything thicker, if you're putting little polka dots or so again, we're gonna really try to get it wet. And now I'm going to gently rub. I'm not really putting a lot of pressure. I just kind of want to get it just glued for now. I'll do the same on the other side, put a little polka dots. You're more than welcome to do this too. If you don't, or if you want to do this for another project, you'll at least have the skill to and the instructions on how to do this. So I'm just rolling up little tiny balls in my hand. I'm not using a lot. If you see me pull, I'm only pulling, I mean, it's so tiny, the tiniest amount of fiber to roll it up. A little goes a long way with the fiber and felting. So again, I'm just gonna press it so that the water and the soap can help the fiber balls adhere, and I'm just gently rubbing. It may look like I'm putting a lot of pressure, but I'm just gliding my hand over the bubble wrap. Now, this agitation is going to get those fibers to kind of creep up from their wetness and grab on to the drier pieces. So this, if you do any kind of adding of elements onto your wet felted project, you'll need to give some time and attention of agitating your wool with the soap and water so that those bits can really adhere to your fibers. Now, if you're using synthetic, a lot of times you'll probably need to use a little bit more thin pieces of fiber to coat on top to adhere. So I'm just rubbing and checking, making sure that my little dots are adhering. So now I'm putting a little bit more pressure so that those fibers can really, now the bubble wrap you see in between those bubbles, the water's being agitated in between those bubbles. And that's what's really helping to get those fibers to intertangle and adhere with each other. I'll do this on both sides, just give it a little bit more aggression with the rubbing. And then I'll check it. If my dots are not adhering the way I want them to, then I'm going to use probably that technique that I mentioned before of using thin pieces of wool. So I'm going to start to do a roll. So roll, and I'm going to do 50 rolls on each side and of each side on each side. So that's 50 rolls on one side and 50 rolls on the other side. So this is going to take a while. As you do that, just flatten it each time you roll. So I did the bottom first, now I'm doing the top, rolling it 50 times, roughly 50 times. If you find that your hands are slipping off of the plastic, you can roll it up in a towel too. That kind of keeps things together. And now my soap is really starting to foam up too, which is good, but it's not an aggressive foam. And then on one side, 50 rolls. And then the last side on this side, 50 rolls. And just make sure that you're rolling up a flat piece. Alright, so this looks good. Just give it a little bit more agitation. Sometimes I just roll it flat just so that my extra thicker bits are really getting to the glue stage. And then flip it over and do the same thing. 50 rolls on each 4 sides. So start at the bottom and roll 50 times. And then the top. Make sure everything's flat before you roll it up. Roll 50 times. Wet felting is a little aggressive. Just kind of like how needle felting is a little aggressive with the stabbing. This isn't a different form of aggression here. And this isn't even as aggressive as we get. Once your fibers really start to felt, that magic point of when the fibers really start to do their magic, that's when we really get aggressive with it. So here's another, the other side, the third side, 50 rolls. This is pretty much just waking up the fibers, telling, okay, get ready to felt. And then the last side, 50 rolls. Make sure that you're working on a flat. And make sure that your plastic isn't folding up on itself either. It's a great arm workout. Wet felting is a great workout. All right, so we're done with our 200 rolls on each side. And I'm just gonna do a quick little flat roll to really hope that these little dots adhere to the layers of fiber. And I'm going to check and see how these little guys are doing. I'm just kind of moving it around. If any of my little dots move like they just did, then I'm going to put them back where they were. And because it's still at this stage, it hasn't really started to do that magic felt yet. I'm going to do the technique where I'm going to kind of create a web of thin. Now I'm using the dark blue to go on top, and I'm just gonna rub it so that it adheres, and I'm gonna do that for all the ones that are loose. I'm creating a thin kind of net type of thing so that those fibers have something to adhere to. It's just a little technique to help any kind of thicker fiber or stubborn fiber to adhere. You would do this also with anything that is synthetic, because synthetic fibers tend to not absorb water as well because it's plastic or some unnatural form of fiber. So they tend to not like to felt. So I'm going to do the same thing. I got a lot of them that came apart here. So I'm just going to create webs so that the natural fiber can just kind of adhere to those thicker pieces of fiber. If you're using anything like polyester, Even some silks, honestly, I have to do this kind of netting process to get those other fibers to adhere to the natural fiber, the wool. And even though the little teal dots is a natural wool, because they're thick, they're not wanting to adhere to the fibers underneath it. So I'm going to help it along with this little netting technique. I was hoping not to do this, but as it showed me that it was not quite glued together, had to pull out the little netting technique. So I'm just going to agitate a little bit so that the net that I just put down really becomes a nice safety glue for it. Alrighty, so I have the dots have been glued. And check the other side and give it a little roll. And see if that worked. It looks like it did. So now I'm going to give it another roll of 50 on each side, just like what we did before. So I'm going to fast forward. I did my 50 on each of the 4 sides, so that's 200 rolls. And I'm just checking to make sure that I have a good adhere. I'm also going to open it up a little bit on the top, making sure that I have a really good glue down. I'm just pinching, making sure that nothing is falling apart. And I'm going to see if this resist is ready to be removed. Feels like it is. Everything feels very solid and together. It should slip out pretty easily. It did. So it looks good. All right, we're going to really give this a little bit more aggression. I'm going to roll it on itself without plastic. Not 50 times, just a few times. And after that, I'm going to open the inside so that the felt does not start felting on the inside. So I'm just going to open it, make sure that my seams are nice and open and even. Flip it to the other side and do another little roll on itself. Again, just a few. You don't have to count or anything. Just do a little bit of rolling until it feels good to you, and then open. You don't want to do it too much because it's still fear of having the inside felt, and you want it to remain open. So if you continue to roll and get the agitation of the fibers together, the fear is to felt and close the inside. You don't want it. You want it to still remain open. So I'm just going to do another roll from the top to the bottom. Just a little bit of a roll. This is pretty much telling the fibers, all right, get ready for the fun stuff here. Again, open every time I do a roll. I'm opening and making sure that my fibers are not adhering to each other inside. And again, roll. Just for a little bit. And then open the inside to make sure that we did not felt the inside, and get rid of the wrinkles. As I'm doing this too, I'm kind of giving it a little pounding, especially for the seams, so that I don't get those sharp edges along the seam. However, I do want a sharp edge on the bottom corner, so I'm just going to roll it in my hands a little bit to make the fibers start to point a little bit. There's still soap and water in my wool, but every time I manhandle it, some of the water and the soap come out. Let's just keep reshaping as we're going. Every aggression that we're doing with these fibers is basically one step towards the fibers starting to really aggressively come together, and this piece is going to start to shrink and harden, actually, just like in needle felting. The more we stab, the firmer our piece gets. It's almost the same with wet felting. The more you're aggressive with it and the more you just keep going, these fibers are going to start to firm up. You're going to start to feel it as you're doing this stage. I'm going back to the beginning and just rolling, just for a few rolls, not too many. Opening, making sure that my inside is not felting in and of itself. It's starting to. Getting rid of the little wrinkles, making sure that my inside is nice and open. My seams in my corner are nicely shaped. Now I'm just kind of giving it a shake. Now I'm going to roll the sides. Again, you don't have to count, just do a little bit of a roll until you feel good, and then open it up again. This is the stage you do not want to add any embellishments on, because they will not glue. They'll never adhere to your project unless you sew it on. So again, the other side, just rolling. And I tend to roll on the bubble wrap, something that's going to give a little bit more aggression. Sometimes I even roll on the towel, because the towel fibers have a little bit more aggression in it also, but not usually at this stage, because sometimes the fibers will stick a little bit to the towel. Depends on what type of material your towel is. So I just kind of stay on this bubble wrap for a while. And then I flip it over to the other side and I do the same thing. Roll it on the sides. I'm so glad I did that netting technique on the little dots, because the dots are nice and glued in place. They're not going anywhere. I'm just giving it. So each time I do this, ever so slightly, the fibers are coming together, firming up, and it's slowly shrinking down, which is great, because I don't have a phone that is that big. If I stopped here, the project would be softer, possibly prone to falling apart later on. So you want to make sure that this is really well felted and firm. Giving it a little bit more aggression. I'm just kind of banging it on the table a little bit, waking up the fiber, say, hello, come on. Giving a little attention to the edges, to the opening edge. kind of rolling it in my hand. And again, I'm just going to roll the bottom just a little bit, just to kind of reshape it and also get it to shrink a little bit and firm up, which it's already starting to do. You see all those wrinkles that happen? That means the fibers are really starting to wake up and say, okay, I'm going to do my job now. I'm going to firm up and I'm going to shrink for you. So to get rid of those wrinkles, I just kind of open it up and give it a little wiggle. And I'm going to make sure that my little corners are nice and pointy. And just rolling those corners into my hands, just so that I have nice pointy corners. Make sure that they're not adhering to each other inside, which they shouldn't be at this point. But really I kind of tend to go a little overboard because as I'm manhandling my project, it tends to soften up after a while. So the corners are extremely pointy right now, but as I'm working it will calm down a bit. So I'm just aggressively getting this little project into a better size, into a better shape, and I really want it to firm up. I want this to be a nice durable case that's not going to fall apart once it's dry. So I'm just going to aggressively keep rolling, keep opening and banging it and just letting it do its felting thing. How do you know you're done? I tend to stop when I get to a good size. Usually I go anywhere between 20 and 30% shrinkage. I don't really like to go any further than that. You can certainly go further than that. But with wet felting, I tend to do more of a 20 to 30% shrinkage rate. I find when I use the carded wool, it helps me get to a 20 to 30% and not feel like it's going to fall apart. And just agitating everything, shaping it, rolling it, giving it a shake, giving it a little bit of a smack here and there. You could already see how much firmer it looks on the bottom than it did when we started, or when I started. And you're going to feel it in your hands too. You're going to feel those fibers really start to feel like a thicker piece of fabric. Now this is a small project, and this project took me a tiny bit over an hour to do. So anything bigger than this, add time onto. So if you're doing a larger purse or like a clutch handbag, I would say maybe 2 hours. If you're doing a bigger purse, like a tote bag or something, at least 3 or 4 hours. I'd like to do slippers at one point. I know that's going to take a while because I'll be using 2 resists at the same time. I'm just doing the same technique that I did, just a little bit more aggressive. Not really being as careful with it, just rolling it, giving it an aggressive, you could see the edges on the top are really starting to felt, and giving it a smack on the table. all of this aggression is basically just telling those fibers to just get into place, get thicker, shrink, do your magic. At this point, it's really starting to shape and felt rather quickly. So I'm not doing as much, as many rolls as I need to do, because I can already tell in my hands it's doing its job in like 1 or 2 rolls. You can see it right then and there. It's just really getting to that spot. It's really shrinking up, firming up. Making sure that I have symmetrical, even sides. Opening it up ever so often, giving it a whack. Putting it back into shape. What's lovely about wet felting is when it dries, you dry it in the shape that you want it to be. So if I wanted this to be a little bit more square, I'd put probably a square board or something in it. But this is just a pouch, so it's a simple, great first beginner wet felting project to do. Super easy. I'm gonna just give it its final wax, I think, and then I'm gonna do a shrinkage test and see if I need to shrink this up anymore. And just eyeing everything, making sure that everything's pretty even. And when it's not, I'm just going to give it a little roll to get it back into that shape, even it up. I'm really liking this design, how it came out, and how it's popping off of that bright blue. Giving it some more wax. This is the aggressive part, because you're just kind of like not even caring how sweet or as gentle as you were before. This is not gentle. This is just get it in shape. Do what you need to do. All right, I'm going to do a test here and see how much it's shrunk. See if I need to shrink it anymore. I usually put it to the corners. So this is maybe a 10% shrinkage. I wanted a little bit more, so I'm going to keep getting aggressive with it. And you'll see it'll shrink back. It'll shrink more the more aggressive. I'm really pressing hard here. Really giving it an aggressive to really tell those fibers, come on, shrink for me. I'll do this on all 4 sides. I'm really pressing down hard, in case you can't see the pressure in the video. Again, flipping it to the other side, really giving it an aggressive give it some more. We're almost there. I can already tell that it got a little smaller. Just with that little bit of pressing down and really giving a more aggressive. Make sure we're good. Really, really, really smack it into the table. I find that the opening tends to widen and my top is wider than my bottom, so it kind of looks like a vase in some ways. So I like to roll a little bit of my top edges in so that that doesn't happen. Once it's dry, it dries in its shape, which is a beautiful thing. Doesn't really go anywhere after that. So I'm just gonna push in the sides, squeeze out a little bit more of that water. Now I'm gonna really give it, yeah, it did. So it's about 15-20% shrinkage. I'm okay with that. So now I'm going to bring this to the sink, rinse it out with cold and hot water, let it dry, and this is my finished project. All dry. I did have it dry on a ruler so that I still had it shape. See how easily and sweet it fits a phone? It's very sweet. I really like this design that happened. Could even use it as an eyeglass case. Nice organic, eco-friendly, sweet piece of an accessory. Hope you enjoyed.